The wheelchair sat alone at the end of the east corridor, turned to face the window, and the man in it had not moved for an hour. Snow came down past the glass in slow, fat flakes, the kind that piled fast and made the parking lot below go soft and white and empty. A plastic tray of food had gone cold on the rolling table beside him. Somebody had clipped a paper Santa to the wall above his head, and the tape on one corner had given up. So the Santa hung crooked, half folded over itself, looking down at nobody. It was Christmas Eve. The day room, 3 doors down, was full of music and visitors and the smell of cider warming on a hot plate, and Harold Voss had asked the nurse twice whether his son had called the front desk yet. Both times she had checked, and both times the answer was the same, and the second time she had not been able to look him in the eye when she said it. Down in the lot, a truck with a plow blade idled, wipers beating, and then went quiet. A man stepped out into the snow with a German shepherd at his knee, and the dog lifted its head toward the long-lit building as if it had already chosen a window. Stay with this one to the end. Some stories take their time the way snow does, settling a little at a time until the whole shape of a thing has changed, and this is one of them. If it stays with you, you know what to do. His name was Eli Marchetti, and he had not meant to be in this town at all. He was 41 years old, built lean and hard, the way a man gets from carrying weight up grades for 20 years, broad through the shoulders with a short, dark crop of hair going gray at the temples, and 3 days of stubble he kept forgetting to deal with. There was a pale seam of scar tissue along the left side of his jaw, an old one, and his eyes were the kind that never fully settled, that read a room and its exits before they read a face. He had done 12 years in the Marines and 2 long tours where the heat came up off the ground like a hand, and after that he had driven trucks because a cab was a small place a man could keep in order, and nobody asked him to stay anywhere longer than it took to unload. The shepherd riding shotgun was named Juno. She was 6, big and dark, a classic tan, and black saddle over a body that had been built for work, with tall ears that swung toward sound before he ever heard it himself. He had washed out of a military program for a soft hip that healed fine but flagged on paper, and a handler Eli trusted had asked him to take her, and he had said yes before he finished thinking about it, which was unlike him. The storm had closed the interstate 40 miles back. The county had been putting out a call for anybody with a plow to help clear lots for the hospital and the 2 care homes before the worst of it came down overnight, and Eli had a blade on the truck and nowhere to be, so he had taken the work. That was the whole of it. He was supposed to clear the lot at Cedar Crest Care Center and move on to the next address on the list. He was not supposed to go inside. Juno, though, would not get back in the truck. He had finished the first pass along the front row, killed the engine to let it cool, and opened the door to walk the edge of the lot and check his work. The dog came down out of the cab and stopped. She stood in the falling snow, with her nose lifted, and her whole body pointed at the building, at one window in particular, the long, bright one at the end of the east wing, and she would not come when he called. He called her twice more, low, the way he did when he meant it. She looked back at him once, and then back at the window, and sat down in the snow. The flakes caught in the dark fur across her back, and did not melt because she had gone so still. In 6 years, she had refused him exactly never. She had crossed a frozen creek on his word once, had ridden out a downshift on a grade that slid the whole rig sideways without so much as lifting her head, had waited 4 hours in a hot cab in a Texas lot because he had told her to wait. She did not refuse. He stood there with the cold working into his collar and the plow blade ticking as it cooled and felt. Against all his habits, the pressure in his chest tightened in a way he did not have a name for. He looked at the window she was looking at from the lot. It was only a rectangle of yellow light, with the shape of a chair in it, and the back of a white head, and nothing else, nothing a man would cross a parking lot for. So he went to see what she saw. The woman at the front desk wore a paper crown from a cracker someone had pulled, and she looked tired in the specific way of people who work holidays, so others do not have to. Her name tag said Renata. She told him visitors signed the book, and he signed it, and he asked if it was all right to bring the dog in. She was calm. She was good with people, and Renata looked down at Juno sitting square and patient on the mat, and something in her face eased. She said the residents would love it. Then she said, lower, that it had been a hard night on the East Wing, and she did not explain, and he did not ask, because he had already started down the hall in the direction the dog was pulling. Harold Voss heard the click of nails on the tile before he heard the man. He was 78, and his body had gotten away from him over the last 2 years, the way a parked truck gets away from you on a grade. Slow at first and then all at once, but his mind had not, and his eyes were sharp and pale blue, and they came up off the window and found the dog first. He had been a machinist for 40 years, had built tooling for a plant 2 counties over that did not exist anymore, and his hands, knotted now and spotted, still carried the flat, hard calluses of a man who had held steel against a wheel until it screamed. He had a long face gone gaunt, white hair combed back by somebody who was not him, and a blanket over his knees that had slid half off without his noticing. When Juno walked up and laid her chin on his thigh very gently, the way she did not do for most people, the old man's hand came down on her head and his jaw worked once, and he did not say anything for a while. When he did, all he said was low, that she had a good face. Eli pulled a chair over and sat. He did not fill the silence. He had learned a long time ago that silence was a thing you could offer a person like a chair or a cup of coffee, and that most people who were hurting wanted that more than they wanted talk. So the 3 of them sat there, the snow coming down outside, the crooked paper Santa over the bed, and after a while, Harold told him, without being asked, that his son and his daughter-in-law had brought him here in October. They had told him it was temporary until the stairs at the house got sorted out. They had told him they would come for Christmas. He had a small suitcase still half-packed in the closet because he had not let himself unpack it all the way. He said this plainly, without self-pity, the way a man reads off a measurement. Then he looked back at the window, at the snow filling the lot, and he said his son had not called, and that he had stopped expecting the phone, and that the worst part was not the missing them. The worst part was lying there figuring out he had become a thing that got dropped off. That answer stayed in Eli's head longer than he expected. He had buried his own father 8 years back, in a town he never went back to, a man he had spent the back half of his life not calling, and he knew the exact shape of the thing Harold was describing from the other side of it, from the side of the one who does not call. Combat had never sat on him like this. He had carried men, and he had carried gear, and he had carried the names of people who did not come home, and none of it pressed on his chest the way this did. The sight of an old man with a half-packed suitcase, watching a parking lot fill with snow on Christmas Eve. He sat with it. Juno did not move from the old man's knee. He cleared the rest of the lot that night because he had said he would, and the work gave his hands something honest to do, while the rest of him turned the evening over. Then, instead of driving on to the next address, he found a room at a motel off the county road with a flickering vacancy sign and a clerk who did not care about the dog, and he lay awake on top of the covers listening to the plow trucks pass and not deciding anything, which was its own kind of decision. He came back the next morning, Christmas Day. He told himself it was to bring the old man a coffee that was not from a machine, and that was true, but it was not the whole truth, and Juno knew it, because she went straight down the East Hall without being led. Over the following days, he kept coming back. He told Renata he was waiting out the weather, which the weather obliged by staying bad, and he started fixing things. That was how he knew how to be useful with his hands. And Cedar Crest was a building full of things that did not quite work. A handrail in the East Hall had pulled loose from the wall, and he set anchors into the stud and made it solid, because an old man's whole world can shrink to the distance between two handrails, and a loose one is a broken promise. A day-room window would not seat in its frame, and let a cold draught sit on whoever took the chair beneath it, and he shimmed and weather-stripped it until it shut clean. He oiled the squeal out of 3 doors. A man named Wallace, 90 and mostly blind, had a recliner whose footrest had jammed half open for so long he had stopped mentioning it, and Eli took the side panel off and found a snapped cable, and went out to the truck and came back with a length that fit close enough, and when the footrest dropped clean. For the first time in a year, the old man laughed once, surprised, and said his late wife had always told him the chair would outlast him, and now it looked like she was right. Eli did not ask permission for most of it. He just brought his tools in from the truck and worked, and Juno lay in whatever doorway gave her the longest view of the hall while he did, and the residents got used to the sight of the lean, quiet man and the big, dark dog moving through the building, and some of them started saving things to tell him, small, broken things, the way people do when they figure out somebody will actually listen. A latch, a flickering bulb, a drawer that stuck. A whole life can narrow down to a list like that, and a man who fixes the list one item at a time is telling each of them something nobody had said to them in a while, which was that the thing they had stopped mentioning still mattered to somebody. Juno did rounds. There was no other word for it. She had picked her people the first night. Now she made a circuit, the East Hall mostly, and she would put her chin on a knee here, lie down across a doorway there, and the staff noticed that the residents she sat with the longest were the ones who had the fewest visitors, as if the dog were keeping a ledger nobody had asked her to keep. An aide named Teresa, broad and warm and 50-something, who had worked the floor 11 years and knew every resident's history the way some people know scripture, told Eli that the dog had it right. She nodded down the hall toward Harold's door and said the man in there had been somebody once, had run a home machine shop, and that his boy used to be proud of him. And then something had changed, and she did not know what, but the visits had stopped before the move, and the calls had stopped after. And a man does not just become trash overnight. Somebody decides it. That was the first crack in it. Eli filed it away. He learned the shape of the thing, slowly, the way he learned a load was off balance by feel before fact. Harold did not complain. Other residents, once they trusted the quiet man, said things. An old woman named Coraline, sharp as a tack at 81 and confined to a chair by a hip that had quit, told him that the new fees had started in the fall. She said it low, watching the hall. She said a man in a good coat had come around to the families, very polished, very sorry about the rising cost of care, and that several of the residents on the East Wing had been moved onto a new billing arrangement around the same time, and that 2 of those residents had since signed papers they did not understand. And she knew because Harold had told her, because Harold and Coraline had been playing gin in the day room every afternoon for 2 months. And an old man tells his gin partner things. The man in the good coat had a name. It was Garrett Pyle, and he ran a company called Meridian Senior Solutions, which, on paper, provided financial management services. to families struggling with the cost of long-term care, and which in practice Eli came to understand over the next 2 weeks. Pyle was in his early 50s, smooth and unhurried, the kind of man who wore a clean charcoal overcoat into a building full of people in cardigans and never once looked out of place to himself. Eli watched him work the lobby one afternoon, watched the practiced sympathy, the hand on the forearm, the leather folder of papers, and Juno, lying at Eli's feet, lifted her head and went still in a way Eli had learned to read. Not a growl, just a stillness. Ears forward, weight shifting under her, the look she got at a fence line in the dark. The dog did not like the man in the good coat. Eli had stopped, years ago, second-guessing that. Here is what Pyle had built. He found families who were frightened and tired, the ones whose parents had savings or a small property or a life insurance policy, and he offered to take the burden of managing it all. He had them sign a power of attorney for financial matters, presented as a convenience, buried in a stack of admission and billing forms at the worst and most overwhelmed moment of a family's year. Once he held that, he became the bridge between the family and the facility's billing, and he widened the spread between what the family paid in and what the facility actually charged, and the difference went to Meridian as a management fee that grew quietly quarter over quarter. The families thought they were paying for their parents' care. Some of that money was. The rest fed Pyle. And the residents whose families had stopped visiting, whose children had handed the whole hard thing off, out of guilt or exhaustion, those were the safest marks of all, because nobody was checking the math. Harold's son had signed. Eli was almost certain of it before he could prove it, and the near certainty sat in him like a swallowed stone. He thought about the half-packed suitcase. He thought about how the old man had decided his boy had thrown him away, when the truth, maybe, was something worse and more ordinary, that the boy had been handled, frightened by a polished man with a folder, into signing a thing he thought was help, and had then stayed away because shame is easier to manage at a distance. He did not tell Harold his theory. Not yet. A theory is not a thing you hand a man who is already grieving. You hand him a fact, or you hand him nothing. So Eli did what he had learned to do, which was gather. He was patient in a way that had frustrated every person who ever loved him and served him well in every other part of his life. He talked to Teresa, who had 11 years of memory and a low, simmering anger she had never had a use for, and he talked to Coraline, who missed nothing, and he started writing things down in a spiral notebook he kept in the truck, dates and names and amounts as people remembered them. None of it was proof. All of it was a map. The first wall he hit was the paper, the billing arrangements, the powers of attorney, the management agreements. All of it lived in files he had no right to, and Pyle controlled the access. Teresa could see the facility's side, the invoices that came in from Meridian, and she risked her job letting Eli look at a stack of them spread across a break room table after her shift. And the spread was there, plain, the management fee climbing in steps that lined up with nothing, no change in care, no change in anything but the season Pyle had come around. The family side, though, the documents that would show what Pyle had told the sons and daughters and what they had actually signed, those were not in the building. And without both sides, Eli had a strange invoice and a bad feeling. And bad feelings did not stand up anywhere that mattered. He sat with that wall for 2 days. Then Coraline gave him the way through it, without knowing she had. She mentioned, over gin, that her own daughter had refused to sign with Meridian. Her daughter lived 3 hours off and visited every other Sunday without fail. And when the polished man had come with his folder, the daughter had read every page, had asked questions Pyle did not like, and had walked out with copies of the very documents he had wanted her to sign and never seen again. Coraline said it with a flat pride, her girl. She said did not sign things she had not read. And Eli understood that somewhere 3 hours away was a manila envelope, holding the one thing he needed. The family side of the paper, the actual contract pile put in front of people, with all its careful language about convenience and management and the quiet clause that handed him the keys. He drove out the next Sunday and met her in a diner off the highway, a steady woman in her 50s named Paula, who had her mother's flat, unimpressed gaze and a coffee she did not drink going cold between her hands. He told her plainly what he thought was happening and what he had, which was not enough, and what he needed, which was her copies. She did not say yes right away. She turned her cup a quarter turn on the saucer and asked him why a truck driver passing through cared what happened to a building full of strangers. He thought about lying, about giving her the easy, clean answer, the one about doing the right thing. And instead he told her about his own father, about the calls he had not made over the back half of a life, about the funeral in a town he had not gone back to since, about an old man with a half-packed suitcase watching snow fill a lot on Christmas Eve. He had not said that much to anyone in years, and it came out flat and plain, and it cost him. She listened without interrupting, which not many people could do. Then she went out to her car and came back with a manila envelope soft at the corners from being handled, and she set it on the table between them and said her mother had raised her on 2 rules: not to sign what she had not read, and not to walk past what she could fix, and that she had never once managed to break either one, even when breaking them would have made her life easier. Now, he had both sides. He did not move yet. This was the part that the people who loved him had never understood. The waiting, the way he would sit on a thing until it was solid all the way through. He had the family contract, and he had the facility. Invoices and the gap between them told the story. But a story is not the same as a case, and a man like Pyle, smooth and unhurried, did not build a thing like this without building a way to walk away from it. Eli had watched him work. He had seen the folder, the practiced sympathy, the speed at which the papers came out at exactly the moment a family was too tired to read. A man that careful had covered himself. The signatures were real. The disclosures, technically, existed, buried where no frightened person would find them. If Eli walked into a sheriff's office with a notebook and a feeling, Pyle would be sorry about the misunderstanding, would produce his signed and witnessed papers, and would move his operation 2 counties over and start again, and Cedar Crest would be left with an old man who now knew for certain he had been thrown away, and no way to undo it. So Eli needed the one thing Pyle could not paper over. He needed the lie spoken out loud. It came together slowly through January. Paula, it turned out, was not the only family member who had balked. Eli, working through Teresa's memory and Coraline's, found 2 more. A son 2 towns over, who had refused and then watched his mother get moved onto the new arrangement anyway after he was cut out, and a niece who had only ever had a bad feeling in a voicemail she had saved. The voicemail was the hinge. Pyle had called the niece back in October, smooth and reassuring, and in trying to talk her into signing, he had said the quiet part, with a confidence that came from never expecting anyone to keep a recording, that the facility could not guarantee a bed for her aunt indefinitely, that beds on the East Wing were limited, and the families who worked with Meridian were prioritized. It was a threat dressed as a courtesy. It was the spoken lie. And it had been sitting in a saved voicemail for 3 months because a worried woman had not been able to bring herself to delete her own unease. Eli did not take it to the sheriff. He took it, with Paula's documents and the invoices and his notebook, to the county's Adult Protective Services office, and then to a lawyer Paula knew who did elder financial work for a legal aid clinic and had been waiting years for a case that did not evaporate the moment she pulled a thread. The lawyer, a brisk woman named Devon Okafor, who wore reading glasses on a chain and did not waste a sentence, went through the stack twice and then took her glasses off and said quietly that this was the first time in a long time she had been handed both halves of one of these. She said the voicemail was the thing. She said a power of attorney obtained by telling a family their parent could lose their bed was a power of attorney obtained by coercion, and coercion was a thread that did not break, it pulled, and the whole arrangement came with it. There was a community by then. That was the part Eli had not planned and could not have. He had come to fix a handrail and wait out a storm, and somewhere in 3 weeks of coffee and gin games and oiled door hinges, he had become a fixed point, and people had gathered around the work the way they do. Teresa brought him the invoices at the risk of her job, and then brought him 3 more aides who had seen things and been afraid to say so. Coraline ran the day room like an intelligence post and knew which family was visiting. Paula drove 3 hours each Sunday and started bringing 2 of the other balked families with her, and a veteran named Sully, 64, who had heard about the thing from his nephew at the diner and showed up one Saturday with a toolbox and no explanation, and started helping Eli rehang doors. Dry humor. None of them carried a weapon. None of them confronted anyone in a hallway. They gathered paper and memory, and they waited. And the waiting was a kind of strength Pyle had never had to reckon with because his whole model ran on people being too tired and too alone to push back. And these people had stopped being alone. The black part came in early February, and it came the way it always does, through the most vulnerable thread. Harold's health turned. He had a heart that had been quietly failing for a year, and a hard cold went through the east wing. And one gray morning, Eli came in to find the door to Harold's room shut and Teresa's face wrong, and for a long, terrible minute in the hall, he was certain he had run out of time, that the old man had died still believing his son had thrown him away. Juno would not leave the door. She lay across it with her chin on her paws and her ears flat, and she made a low sound Eli had heard from her exactly twice in 6 years. Harold had not died. He had been moved to the county hospital in the night, and he was holding, but it was close, and the doctors used the careful words people use when they are leaving room for either outcome. Eli sat in the hospital corridor that night with the dog at his feet and felt the careful machine of his patience seize up. He had been gathering. He had been doing it right, the slow, honest way, the way that did not blow up in a frightened family's face. And it had been the right way, and it had also been slow. And the man at the center of it might not live to see it come good. He thought about all the times in his life he had waited too long to say a thing or make a call, and how the waiting had cost him a father, and he understood, sitting on that hard bench, that being careful and being a coward could wear the exact same coat. So he did the one thing he had been saving. He drove to the address Teresa had for Harold's son, a town 90 minutes north, and he knocked on the door of a tired split level with a basketball hoop over the garage and a wreath still up in February. And when the man opened it, Eli knew him before he spoke, because he had Harold's long face and Harold's pale blue eyes and the specific hollowed look of a person who has been not thinking about something for months. His name was Marcus. Eli did not accuse him. He had decided that on the drive. He told the man plainly that his father was in the hospital and that it was close, and he watched the man's hand grip the door frame the way Harold's hand had gripped the blanket, and then he told him the rest, gently, the thing he had been almost certain of since the first week. He told him about Meridian, about the folder, about the threat in the voicemail, about the spread in the invoices. He told him his father believed he had been thrown away, and he told him that he did not think that was what had happened. He thought a tired, frightened man had been handled by a professional, and had then stayed away, because the shame of it was easier to carry from a distance than up close. Marcus sat down on his own front step in the February cold and put his face in his hands, and the story came out of him in pieces. The polished man, the folder at the admission desk, the day they moved his dad, when Marcus's own marriage was failing and his job was shaking, and his father needed more care than the house or his nerves could give. Pyle saying he would handle everything, that it was a kindness, that the family did not need to worry about the money side. And then the bills that did not make sense, and the questions Marcus was too ashamed to ask because asking would mean admitting he had handed his father to a stranger and signed something he had not read, and the calls he stopped making because every call ended with his father asking when he was coming and Marcus having no answer he could stand to say out loud. He had not thrown his father away. He had drowned, quietly, the way people do, and a man in a good coat had been standing by to profit off the drowning. Eli told him there was a way to undo the worst of it, and that it started with him talking to a lawyer named Devin Okafor, and that it started before that with him getting in his truck right now and driving to the hospital, because the undoing of the money was a slow legal thing, but the other undoing could happen tonight if the old man was awake. Harold was awake. Marcus came through the hospital room door at 11 that night, still in the clothes he had answered his own door in, and Eli stood in the hall with Juno and did not go in, because some rooms are not yours to be in. He saw it through the long window, though. He saw the old man's pale eyes come up off the blanket and find his son, and he saw the son cross the room fast and fold down over the bed, and he saw Harold's knotted machinist's hand come up and grip the back of his boy's coat, the way a drowning man grips a rope, and he saw both of them shaking, and he turned and walked Juno down to the end of the corridor to give them the dark and the quiet to do it in. The legal undoing took the rest of the winter, and it was not dramatic because that kind of thing never is. Devin Okafor filed to void the powers of attorney as coercively obtained, and the voicemail was exactly the load-bearing thing she had said it would be, and Adult Protective Services opened a formal inquiry, and the county attorney's office, once they had both halves of the paper laid side by side, found the spread impossible to look away from. Pyle did not appear in a hallway to be confronted. Men like Pyle never do. He sent a lawyer, and then he sent a different lawyer, and then Meridian Senior Solutions quietly ceased operating in the county, and the families who had been overcharged began slowly, in the grinding way of these things, to be made whole. Pyle himself slid off toward whatever the next county over held for him, and Eli felt the old familiar frustration of it, that the smooth man in the good coat would never quite stand in front of what he had done. Devin, though, told him something he kept. She said, "You do not always get to punish the man. Sometimes all you get to do is take the thing he built apart so it cannot keep eating people, and free the ones already in its mouth. And that is not nothing. That is most of the whole job. And the men who need to see the villain dragged in chains are usually more interested in the drama than the freeing." Harold came home from the hospital in March, and home by then was a complicated word. The house with the stairs was sold to cover the care, and that grief was real, and Eli did not paper over it. Marcus, though, had moved his father not back into the split level, but into a small ground floor place 10 minutes from him, with no stairs and a wide door for the wheelchair, and a yard where a dog could run, and the calls did not stop anymore, and the visits did not stop, and the suitcase, Teresa told Eli, had finally gotten unpacked all the way. Eli had meant to leave a dozen times. The storm had cleared in January, and the interstate had reopened, and there was always another address on another list. He kept finding reasons, though, a door, a railing, a window, and somewhere in there the reasons stopped being repairs and started being people. And one morning in early spring he was standing in the muddy yard of Harold's new place watching Juno run flat out across the thawing grass after nothing at all. Just running because the ground had gone soft and the sun was out, and Harold was on the small porch in his chair with a coffee that was not from a machine, and Sully was up on a ladder fixing a gutter that did not strictly need fixing. And Teresa had come by on her day off, and Paula's car was pulling in, and Eli understood, standing in the mud, that he had not had a reason to leave in weeks. He had only had the habit of leaving, and the habit had finally run out. Harold called him up onto the porch and made him sit, and the old man was quiet for a while, the way he had been that first night. And then he said, looking out at the yard, that a man could spend a long time deciding he was a thing that got dropped off, and that it took somebody coming back to undo a thing like that, and that not many came back. He put his hand down on Juno's head when she came up the steps, and he said the dog had known. The dog had walked right to his window in the snow. He said it like a fact. He had checked against a wheel, flat and certain. Then he looked at Eli, at the seam of scar along his jaw, and the eyes that were finally, for once, settled, and he said the boy could stay as long as he wanted, that there was a room, and that a man who came back the way he had was not a stranger anymore. Eli did not answer with words. He had never been good with those. He just stayed where he was, on the porch, in the sun, and did not reach for the keys. And Harold seemed to understand that this was the answer, because he nodded and went back to watching the dog run. Years of moving had trained Eli to keep everything he owned in a cab the size of a closet, but years of moving had done something else to him too, had worn a groove he kept falling into, the groove that said leave before a place can ask you to stay. Standing in that muddy yard with the sun on his neck, he felt the groove and stepped out of it on purpose, and it was the hardest easy thing he had ever done. If you have come this far with them, then you already know the thing this story has been trying to say, and you do not need me to say it plainly. But I will anyway, because some things ought to be said out loud where a person can hear them. There is somebody in your life right now who has quietly decided they have become a burden, a thing to be managed at a distance, a parcel that got dropped off and forgotten. They will not tell you this. They will read off the fact of it the way Harold read a measurement, flat and without complaint, if they tell you at all, and most of the time they will not. The going back is the whole thing. Not the grand gesture, not the rescue, just the going back. The coffee that is not from a machine. The call you keep not making, made. You will think you have waited too long. You almost never have. And if a dog can stand in the falling snow and pick out the one window in a building full of windows where a person is sitting alone, deciding he no longer counts, then surely you and I, with all the more that we have been given, can manage to go back through a door we have been avoiding and sit down in the chair and stay a while. May God keep the ones you love and the ones who feel forgotten, and may He give you the nerve to go back before the snow fills the lot. Stay warm out there, and stay close to your people. And if this story moved you, you know how to find the next one.